welcome to another episode of LSVT Global's podcast, Think Big and Loud, where we share inspiring stories, expert insights, and engaging conversations, all designed to empower and uplift the lives of individuals with neurological conditions and those who love and support them. My name is Beth Peterson, and I'll be your host for the show. Today, I'm honored to welcome two of the world's leading experts in Parkinson's disease, Dr. Ray Dorsey and Dr. Michael Okun. Both are internationally recognized neurologists, passionate advocates for Parkinson's, and co-authors of the groundbreaking new book, The Parkinson's Plan, A New Path to Prevention and Treatment, which we'll be discussing today. And this actually debuted on the New York Times bestseller list. So a huge congrats to you both for the great work that you've done with this book and the early success that you've had. Dr. Dorsey is a professor of neurology at the University of Rochester and a global leader in Parkinson's research and care, pioneering innovative approaches that address not only symptoms, but the environmental causes of this condition. Dr. Okun is a professor of neurology at the University of Florida, the medical advisor of the Parkinson's Foundation, and a highly respected voice in translating complex science into meaningful patient-centered care. Together, they're not only reshaping how we understand Parkinson's, but also how we can act. So to prevent it, to slow its progression, and to create a future where Parkinson's is far less common. And just a quick note before we begin, we're going to be giving away some free copies of their new book, The Parkinson's Plan. So stick around until the end of the episode to hear how you can enter. And so Dr. Dorsey and Dr. Okun, welcome to the podcast today.
Amazing. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us, Beth. You can call us Michael and Ray.
Michael and Ray, okay. Okay, so I just want to kind of start from the top and see what inspired you to write the Parkinson's Plan at this particular moment in time.
Yeah, well, Ray, you want to pipe in first, and then I'll jump on.
Perfect. So, as you and your listeners know, Parkinson's is one of the world's fastest-growing brain diseases. The global burden of disease study estimated that about 2.6 million people have the disease globally in 1990. Fast forward to 2021, 11.8 million people have it. So in the span of just 30 years, a quadrupling of the number of people with Parkinson's affected globally. And Michael and I have looked at these numbers, and I think they're our report card. And if we use them as our report card, it means people like Michael and I have not been doing a very good job in addressing the Parkinson pandemic. And, our peers have done so when it came to HIV. Our peers have done so when it came to COVID-19. Our peers in neurology are doing a really good job of reducing the burden of stroke, and the incidence of which is falling. But we're not doing a very good job of addressing the rise of Parkinson's disease. And so Michael and I, in the introduction of our book, said that we're failing the Parkinson's community, and Michael and I don't like to fail. And so we wrote the book, The Parkinson's Plan, which actually gives you a plan, P-L-A-N, to prevent the disease, learn why it begins, amplify the voices of those affected. Can't think of a better motto for this podcast than amplifying the voices, and navigating the frontiers of treatment. So we give you a detailed plan, including 25 recommendations to potentially slow the rate of progression of the disease, and a plan for us as individuals and communities and societies to create a world without Parkinson's disease.
And I'll just add real quickly to that, we need a movement. I mean, it is time for a movement, and we wrote about this in Ending Parkinson's Disease, the last book, now in the Parkinson Plan. It's time for a movement, okay? And the movement should start now. There's a group called the PD Avengers that have about 10,000 grassroots people that are really trying to make a difference. And it's time for us to be like polio and HIV and breast cancer. And our time is now, and we need to bring our voices up because, as Ray said, this is the fastest growing neurodegenerative disease. A new diagnosis in the U.S. every 6 minutes, similar all around the world.
Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to talk and kind of start about that prevention piece. So you argue that many cases of Parkinson's are preventable. So what evidence or new evidence has emerged about environmental and lifestyle factors that contribute to Parkinson's?
Yeah, I don't think it's an argument. I think we increasingly can say this is a fact. So there's a great study led by the Parkinson's Foundation called PD Generation, and they offered free genetic counseling and free genetic testing to anyone with Parkinson's disease in the United States and increasingly around the world. And in 2024, they published the results of the genetic testing of the first 8,000 participants in one of the top journals called Brain. And they found that 12.5% of Americans with Parkinson's disease carry a genetic cause or genetic risk factor for the disease. Said another way, 87% of Americans, the vast majority of Americans with Parkinson's disease, do not carry any known genetic cause or risk factor for the disease. 87% of Americans with Parkinson's carry no known genetic cause or risk factor for the disease, implying that the principal causes of Parkinson's lie not within us, not in our genes, not outside of us, in our environment. That same study was reproduced in Europe in a study called the Rostock study, looking at people with Parkinson's in Europe, North and South America, and the Middle East, and they conclude that 14% of people with Parkinson's carry a genetic cause or risk factor. Again, over 85% of people in the large portions of the world do not carry any known genetic cause or risk factor for the disease. And so in the book, we highlight 3 classes of environmental toxins or chemicals that are contributing to the rise of Parkinson's disease. The first are certain pesticides, with paraquat, a commonly used weed killer, being the poster child for that. The second are some dry cleaning chemicals, including a chemical called trichloroethylene, really simple 6-atom molecule with 3 chlorine atoms, hence its name trichloroethylene. Its cousin perchloroethylene is still widely used in dry cleaning. I think over 60% of dry cleaners in the US are still using a chemical that's been linked to Parkinson's disease. And then outdoor air pollution, a study by our colleague, Dr. Ted Dawson, and his colleagues at Johns Hopkins showed that exposure to air pollution increases your risk for Parkinson's disease. And then he, importantly, in the laboratory, showed that this outdoor air pollution can contribute to mitochondrial dysfunction, the energy-producing parts of cells that we know are damaged in Parkinson's disease. So the principal causes of Parkinson's disease are not in our genes for the vast majority of people with the disease. Instead, they're in our environment: pesticides, dry cleaning chemicals, and air pollution being the big 3.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. So those are some examples of the toxins that can contribute to it. Are there also behaviors that people should be aware of that can reduce their risk?
Yeah, so in the book, we give you, because we told you what's causing it, you'd like to know what you can do to reduce your risk of ever getting it. So on page 237 of our book is the Parkinson's 25 actions that people can take in their everyday life to reduce their risk of getting the disease. I'll just read you the first one, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Wash your produce, even your organic ones. Pesticides have contaminated our food supply. Remnants of pesticides are found in 20% of common foods. Organic produce, dairy products, and meat can reduce exposures, but can still have unsafe residues of pesticides. So wash your produce at least with water, and consider simple vegetable washes, vinegar, or salt solutions too. And we give you 25 ways that your children, your grandchildren can reduce their risk of Parkinson's. But we also recognize that there are 12 million people with Parkinson's disease worldwide. So, and we know that the progression of Parkinson's disease is variable. Some people have a slow rate of progression, and some have a fast rate. And we think one of the reasons why some people might have a slow or fast rate is some people have ongoing exposure to these chemicals, much like a smoker with lung cancer who's continuing to smoke. But in this case, with Parkinson's, people are usually unaware of their exposures. So we hope that this book raises awareness so people can take actions. You take these actions and you can potentially slow the rate of progression of the disease. And that's not just a hypothesis. Increasingly, there's evidence, for example, that shows exposure to high levels of air pollution, for example, increases your risk of being hospitalized if you have Parkinson's disease. So if you already have the disease, we give you 25 everyday actions you can to possibly slow your rate of progression.
And I'll just add, this morning a piece dropped by Nick Kristof, who's a opinion writer for the New York Times, and he read the book, and because of him reading the book, he wrote about how he changed his own behavior, and that gets back to the Parkinson 25, thinking about carbon filters. He talked about the idea of organic dry cleaners and airing out your clothes, getting those bags off of the clothes, washing your fruits and vegetables. These are things we should be doing.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, I was going to ask about that Parkinson's 25, and I think you've described it really well. It seems like a really nice checklist of, like you said, so everyday actions that people and communities can be taking to either reduce the risk or to help slow the progression. And then I did want to touch on, you were talking about, so in our audience, we have people with Parkinson's as well. And I want to make sure we touch on how they can live well with Parkinson's. And so what does your book, what does the Parkinson's plan recommend for managing symptoms beyond medication?
Yeah, so thanks for asking that. Super important. We know now that there are 11.8 million folks with Parkinson now in 2025. When we wrote the book, Ending Parkinson's, Ray had crunched the numbers and predicted they were going to be, based on the global burden of disease study, about 12 million by 2035. So we're way ahead of pace, and this is not a good thing. So it's really important. As we talk about prevention, we also talk about things that we can do today to live well with Parkinson's. And so in addition to the Parkinson's 25, we also talk a lot about how we need to change our approach to care systems and to think about not just the person with the disease being the son, but also the care model and putting the pieces around them. And then we have some good practical tips for folks in the book, like if you're on dopamine, you need to be on a multivitamin because dopamine can deplete several important cofactors in the blood. And so a lot of people don't know that. There's twice the risk of skin cancer. I don't know if you knew that with Parkinson's disease, 2 times to getting malignant skin cancer. So making sure that you protect your skin and making sure that you're thinking about osteoporosis, twice as common in folks who have Parkinson disease, even in men, and it's more men than women that have Parkinson, and we still think about getting bone scans in men. There are lots of things we know now that we can do, exercise being one of the most important, and also sleep. And when we sleep, we know there's a system in the brain called the glymphatic system that helps clear things out. I think of it like dump trucks in your dreams coming and carrying away all the debris and things in your brain as you're sleeping. So helping people to sleep, we have sensors and things that we can look at that. And so exercise, sleep, a multidisciplinary team with the right therapists doing the right things, using some sensor technologies, but also being preventative about the things that are going to potentially get you in trouble. We need to have a plan. And Ray and I often say, like when we talk about a Parkinson plan, I'm glad you asked the question, it has to be like, what is your plan if you have Parkinson? And then what is society's plan? So there are 2 levels, but let us not forget about the 12 million people now, 11.8 million people now that have Parkinson. Really important.
Mm-hmm. And touching on that comprehensive approach, so beyond that medication, and an area that I'm interested in as a speech language pathologist, you talk about the role of speech, physical, and occupational therapists as essential components to that multidisciplinary team and not just add-ons to medical treatment. Can you touch a little bit on that comprehensive approach with allied health professionals as part of the team?
Yeah, so there's mounting evidence now that we need to put the right people around folks. And in the United States where I live, but also all around the world, and we've traveled to every continent except for Antarctica, and there are real care disparities, for folks. And it turns out that people think that, oh, the answer is you just need to see your either healthcare professional, which could be an advanced practice provider or a doctor. And that's absolutely not the right approach to Parkinson's disease. We now know and have a lot of literature that tells us that seeing a physical therapist for fall prevention is really important. In fact, falls and aspiration pneumonia are cited as the leading causes of death in Parkinson's, and both can be preventable, right? And so seeing a physical therapist regularly, okay, and also using other things like exercise and in between, if you can get access to personal trainers, making sure you have the right plan and also the plan not to fall. And even if you can't exercise because let's say you're in a wheelchair, you have difficulty with posture and balance, we have lots of ways we can get that to you with recumbent cycling. We now know that by Google data, and let me explain that, there's data that we collect in studies, right, that says, okay, this is significant, we should do this because we run it through all these statistical analyses. But now we have something called Google data, which we get so much data on people that we know the answer even without running it through a statistical analysis. We know the data on exercise is that way. We know it's about 7,000 to 7,500 steps a day, or step equivalents, which may mean recumbent biking in a chair with a device placed in front of the chair or in a recumbent bike. We know that screening for speech and swallowing deficits is helpful, and we have things like there's been a randomized study of a device called an expiratory muscle strength trainer to help people with swallowing and aspiration pneumonia. We know we can employ those things. Occupational therapists, so underappreciated, but so important, because hey, what's more important than reintegrating back into life, right? And that's what an occupational therapist does. They say, who are you? What are your needs? And how are we going to create a plan to help you interact with the world? It turns out that people are not seeing folks, not just seeing folks who are trained in these areas in Parkinson, but even seeing folks that have training in these areas, so even getting to the basics is really important. So in summary, we always recommend that you see physical, occupational, speech, and swallow therapy at least once a year, okay? If not more, if you can get access to them, and to have a plan that integrates folks. And then we pull in people from different specialties. So we may pull in, neuropsychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, nutritionists, get that team. And in the book, The Parkinson Plan, we talk about the need for a new care model. And so we talk about the Parkinson universe. Patient is the sun, person with disease is the sun, right? Mercury is going to be the caregiver. That's going to be the closest part to the sun. So it gets a little hot, right? But also on the outside of Mercury, okay, and we got to take care of the caregiver too. 50% caregiver burden, okay, with Parkinson. We know caregiver strain is very high. As we move out from that, all the planets are all these different disciplines. We talked about PTOT, speech, swallow, psychiatry, mental health, etc. And then when we get out to Pluto, Pluto is stigma. It's always there. 25% of people hide their diagnosis. We got to get rid of that. Our satellites are all these new wearables and sensors, so we can watch your sleep, we can watch your exercise, we can monitor, you can have these great discussions with your doc. The stars are the support groups, and then of course the asteroid field is my favorite, and there's a quote in the book that I think Ray and I both enjoy, and that's Chewbacca, Chewbacca and Han Solo in Star Wars. They're flying through the asteroid field and talking about what the odds are of them surviving this asteroid field, and it's 1 in almost 4,000. I mean, some incredible odds, and that's the odds of people surviving in the current healthcare systems around the world as we have them set up. And so, parking, insurance, reimbursements, all different in different zip codes, but all commonly underappreciated across the world. So we've got to take care of the 11.8 million people and growing. And by the way, last shocker for you, Parkinson's is growing faster than Alzheimer's disease on the last 2 global burden of disease studies. So really important that we're taking care of the burden at the same time making a proportional investment in prevention and in research.
Well, thank you. That was a great comprehensive answer to that. And with speech, PT, and OT, can you talk about the importance of connecting immediately, like upon diagnosis? I know we have people in the audience who may be newly diagnosed, or as you mentioned, caregivers, a huge support system there. They're supporting someone with Parkinson's. So can you talk to them about the importance of that early connection with those disciplines?
100%. And we know from Allison Willis, who is a great epidemiology and health outcomes researcher at the University of Pennsylvania at the Parkinson Foundation Center of Excellence there. We know that just seeing a neurologist, okay, reduces morbidity. That's, side effects, bad things happening to you. Mortality, that's death, right? And nursing home placement, we all know what that is. Keeping people in the home. Just seeing a neurologist, if we look at Medicare data. And so seeing a doctor, not even a movement trained doctor, and there's a shortage of those folks. We want folks to be seen early. And in my career, I'll tell you a little story. When we created the multidisciplinary team at the Pixel, some 20 plus years ago, and then began to study this with the Parkinson Foundation and other partners and create these care models and put them to the test. When we were referring people early on to speech therapists and swallow therapists and occupational and physical therapists, we were thinking, maybe we're wasting the healthcare system's money by referring them early, getting them early treatment. You know what? It's actually the opposite. It's actually better to see them earlier. It's better to get a plan earlier, and it's better to be checking in because it's a dynamic disease that changes over time. And actually, we're encouraged more from the interactions with them over the years that why are you not referring them earlier, even as we made that move to refer earlier. And so earlier intervention is important, but I want to stress to folks, it's not just the doctor and it's not just the advanced practice provider. And we should also respect the advanced practice providers because they're awesome. And many of them are trained, specialty trained and sub-trained. We are outnumbered here, okay, by the number of folks with Parkinson. And so we need to train more people, get primary care, get geriatrics involved. That needs to be all part of our plan.
Mm-hmm. Well, and going back to your asteroid analogy, so how can people with Parkinson's advocate for themselves within this healthcare system? So within those asteroids, what are some things they can do?
Yeah, so well, the first thing is our hearts go out to everyone who has Parkinson. You shouldn't have to, become this strong advocate to get the care and get the right kind of care. It turns out that's just where we are right now, and so we help people with that. So, for example, we created with the Parkinson Foundation the hospitalization initiative, and so the hospital safety guide, keeping people safe in the hospital. What did that teach us? That taught us about education. Okay. And so as we write a book, about having the plan and we're thinking about the Parkinson plan and we think about advocacy, the first thing I tell folks is have a plan. Okay, we need a plan if you're going to go to the hospital. 1 in 3 people are going to go to the hospital. You're going to need a plan for your care. Okay, if you can't get access to these services, if you live in the United States, you have them as a right. Okay, now the insurance company may need to underwrite them after 30 days, but you can walk in and get access to physical, occupational, speech, and swallow therapy and have people begin to work with you. One of the most important things is if you're disconnected from experts, you should use the foundations. Like, for example, one that I've worked with a long time is the Parkinson Foundation, but there are great foundations, Michael J. Fox, APDA, Davis Finney, Brian Grant, Parkinson UK. I'm going to leave them out because in our book, we've got dozens of these great places. Get information, get educated. But not only that, if your locality doesn't have education on Parkinson or doesn't have a therapist or a doctor or an advanced practice provider or a psychologist trained in Parkinson, get the data and then hand them the data. You teach them, okay? I know that seems like crazy, right, for me to say that, but it turns out that you can help by educating them and creating that care plan in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And then
yeah, go ahead.
Just to add on, like what people can do as advocates, everyone listening, whether you have Parkinson's, whether you're a friend, a spouse, a family member, whether you're a speech pathologist, occupational therapist, physical therapist, join the PD Avengers. PDAvengers.com is a global grassroots organization founded by 3 individuals with Parkinson's, led by 3 individuals with Parkinson's. Their goal is to make your lives easier with Parkinson's and help create a world without it. It's free to join. Michael and I have joined PDAvengers.com. It takes 30 seconds to do so. They have 8,000 members. We need to get to 10,000 members as fast as possible. And Michael says we need to then go 10x more. We need to get to 100,000 members. If people make their voices heard, the course of this disease changes not only for this generation, but for generations to come.
And I will just say, Ray and I have been out on a book tour and meeting people out on the road. And we've been out on the road for many, many years doing this. But, the tenor of what's changed now is we're seeing some anger in the Parkinson community. And that's good. And it's not that I want people to be angry, but we need to get motivated. We need to feel the emotion and say, why is this? Why are we exposing ourselves to these things? Why aren't we doing the things we can do to make things better for the people that have Parkinson today, but also for prevention tomorrow, creating the right research plans? And as we have an exploding disease going faster than Alzheimer's disease, growing faster than Alzheimer's, I'm going to say it twice in the same sentence, that's huge, right? And so it's not that I want people to be angry, but I kind of want people to be angry. Like we need to move, and part of that is going to be to join that train, join the PD Avengers, join organizations, raise your voice, and let people know that we need to create the right plan, the right funding, the right structures around the world to get people access to drugs, to get people access to care, but also if we're going to, decrease these numbers and level the rise of Parkinson.
Mm-hmm. When I loved a couple of things, I just wanted to touch on that idea, advocate for yourself. And in doing that, you're helping yourself, but also, everyone else with Parkinson's too. That idea, you might be bringing information to your doctor or neurologist. And like you said, it might feel funny, but you're helping many others than just yourself too. And I'll just make a note. I'll put the website for PD Avengers and the show notes at the end of the podcast too, so people can check that out and join. So thanks for letting our listeners know about that. And then just another question for those living with Parkinson's: how does your approach to Parkinson's differ from the traditional understanding and treatment methods?
So I'll start. So one, I think we need to learn why you have the disease. So I spend at least 5 to 10 minutes trying to figure out why someone with Parkinson's has the disease. And you should do this for every condition, whether you have a numbness in your hand, a cough, or Parkinson's. You need to find out why you have the disease. And I'll give you at least 3 reasons why. Second, if you want a cure, the prerequisite to a cure for a disease is knowing what its cause is. Michael and I really can't think of any conditions that we can cure medically where we don't know its cause, and we give you lots of examples in the book, everything from peptic ulcer disease to polio, where once we figured out the cause, we either cured it or prevented it. Second, you need to figure out what you can do to slow your rate of progression of the disease, and we give you 25 recommendations. But if you're drinking well water, and well water is prone to be contaminated by pesticides from nearby farms, perhaps you should put a water filter on your water supply at home, maybe even a reverse osmosis system, and perhaps you should test your water for pesticides. And then, so it can help slow the rate of progression. And then third, I think most powerfully, is that you can prevent this disease for your kids and family members. If we know what the causes of a disease are, we can prevent it for all people and all time. Both Michael and I have kids, and I think we have an obligation, if not a duty, to make sure that the diseases that we battle in our lifetimes, that our children, to the extent possible, are spared those battles. We know Parkinson's sucks. This is what Michael J. Fox and Brian Grant says. We know it's debilitating, and we increasingly know that the vast majority of Parkinson's is preventable. We need to take actions to prevent this disease, and the first step to doing that is learning why the disease begins.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that a couple of words, P words: prevent, proactive, practical. You want to know how we're changing the way we approach people? In those 3 words. We're talking about prevention, and we need to start talking more about primary prevention. What can you do today? What can you do tomorrow? What can you be proactive? Prevent those falls. Prevent that aspiration pneumonia. Work on that voice. Do all those things that you can do. And make it practical. The best type of exercise, the best type of sleep is the thing you're willing to do. So how can we modify things so that you're going to be able to be successful? These are the things that we're thinking about the most.
Yeah, those are great, helpful examples. Thank you. Well, and I wanted to ask about caregivers. You've mentioned that a bit. So what role do caregivers and family members play in the new model of Parkinson's care you propose?
It's huge, right? So we symbolize the caregiver through the planet Mercury, closest planet to the sun, right? They're going to get the heat. But remember this. So we've worked for many years doing research as well. We have a database called Inform here at Pixel. We've got real-world databases through the Parkinson Foundation, and there are lots of publications from lots of good groups. What have we learned? Well, we've learned that more than half of people who are caregivers with Parkinson have moderate to severe caregiver strain. We've also learned that if you don't take care of the caregiver, the outcome is worse. We've learned that if your caregiver, is the man, so if a woman gets Parkinson, and by the way, women can get Parkinson even though it's more common in men, your outcome is worse. And so we need to encourage people. We need to encourage our men who are caregivers to do a better job. Sorry, guys, I'm going to challenge you to step up. I always challenge you, those of you that have been in my clinic and know all of the women that I take care of, I always challenge every time the male caregivers who improve that data, and also turn our attention. And the trainees are always so befuddled by the fact that when I go to see a person with Parkinson, I spend so much time addressing directly the caregiver, the care partners. If we don't take care of the caregivers and care partners, the outcome is worse. We need to pay attention to their mental health. We need to pay attention to to the things that they need to do and help them to navigate an impossible asteroid field. It's also unconscionable that 25% or more of people have to hide their diagnosis or feel they have to hide their diagnosis of Parkinson's. We need to change the stigma equation, and so that is so important. And so those are the things that we're thinking about. And then just finally, the American healthcare system, and it's different in every locality, really doesn't provide funds for the counseling services that we need. So funds for social work, funds for nutrition, funds for genetics counseling, funds for licensed clinical social workers that can do counseling. And these services are not just for the folks with Parkinson. It's just as important to keep the caregiver or care partner healthy. And so we have to think about that system. We talk in the book about tax breaks as one way that we could provide funding to fill those gaps with mental health and fill those gaps with social work and get people exercising with personal trainers, moving care back into the home. And as Dr. Dorsey has done amazing research on, and along with many others, telemedicine and moving care into the home when we can to make it more convenient and more practical can also be helpful.
When I was going to ask about that next, you kind of got into it, but about how can public health policy adapt to better support prevention and treatment of Parkinson's? So you mentioned it from the caregiver angle, but it seems like a lot of the changes you propose, I mean, the grassroots, movements are very important, but we also need that to come from health policy changes. So how do we do that?
Yeah, so Ray and I, we like talking about this issue, and we talk about prevention as one construct. Prevention isn't a pill, it's policy, right? And same for healthcare, right? And thinking about care and things. And so when we think about these really challenging issues, we have to, look hard at ourselves. We looked hard when we wrote Ending Parkinson's Disease. We looked even harder when we wrote the Parkinson Plan. And, grade ourselves, as Ray always says. We should not give ourselves really good grades or pat each other on the back. We're just not there. We need to be thinking more creatively. But guess what? There are also precedents. There are also historical diseases that have done better than us in caring for people. Polio, HIV, breast cancer, just three that come to mind we've written a lot about. Let's look to see how they were able to set up these programs to make sure that people with HIV, were getting care navigation. Same with people with cancer, making sure that folks are being seen, that they're being heard, that we're monitoring viral levels. And guess what? Is it unbelievable to think that in HIV we can get these expensive and sometimes multiple drugs and cocktails to HIV people all over the world, but the majority of places that need levodopa, dopamine, a pill that's 50 years old, pennies on the dollar, we still have situations in both developed and less developed countries where we can't get dopamine to people. So our care is broken, and we have to just, take a match, light a fire to it, think about doing it differently, and there are precedents here that I think we can follow. And Ray, so what do you think about the policy side?
Yeah, so in the book, as Michael indicates, we give you a Parkinson's prevention pyramid. At the top of the pyramid are what actions that we can do as individuals to prevent or slow the rate of progression of the disease. And we've mentioned the Parkinson's 25, washing your fruits and vegetables, water filters, air purifiers, making sure you're not poisoning yourself at home with use of pesticides in your home environment. Then we say, what are the things that we can do in your community? And we'll give you 4. We can give citizens the right to know. So if you live near a farm, if you live near a golf course, shouldn't you be informed as to what pesticides are being used near you in your community? Shouldn't you know if your children's school or playground is being sprayed with pesticides? So citizens should have the right to know. We need to create pesticide-free schools and playgrounds. I think all of us agree that we should be spraying nerve toxins near children. We need to build homes and schools away from freeways, which are prone to outdoor air pollution. And we can develop organic golf courses. If we can have an organic apple, why can't we have an organic golf course? We've seen that in Martha's Vineyard, but why can't we reduce the amount of pesticides used on golf courses? And then at a global level, a societal level, we need to measure the disease. So Michael and I in the global burden of disease are using models to estimate the number of people with disease. If we measure exactly how many people are getting the disease, we can manage this with greater precision and with improved interventions. What gets measured gets managed, and right now we don't measure Parkinson's disease very well. We of course need to ban these dangerous chemicals, including paraquat. We need to put the burden of proof on chemical companies that their products are safe, rather than having to rely on the public or researchers to prove that their chemicals are unsafe. And then we need to stop subsidizing the use of pesticides. In the United States, we spend over $15 billion on agricultural subsidies. 99% of those subsidies go to conventional farming, which uses pesticides.
Mm-hmm. So with that, so I know you talked about it in the book too, some of the funding you think could come from the organizations that are responsible for some of the toxins and pesticides that are out there.
Yeah, we're just missing the boat here on the economic benefits of preventing the disease. Just Medicare alone, the Universal Health Care Program for Older Americans in the United States, spends $225 billion per year on Parkinson's disease care. If we just prevented 1% of Parkinson's disease, we would save American taxpayers $250 million a year. That's about what the Michael J. Fox Foundation spends on Parkinson's research. They actually spend a little bit more. And that's what the National Institutes of Health spent on Parkinson's research last year. That's just cost Medicare savings from 1% of prevention. That's not even counting the $25 billion that families bear the burden of Parkinson's disease in terms of lost wages, lost disability, and caregiver support. And we're subsidizing it. We're subsidizing the use of these chemicals on the front end with subsidies, and we're subsidizing the consequence of these chemical exposures on the back end through Medicare and healthcare expenses. Mm-hmm. If we make the chemical manufacturers bear the burden of their costs on the front end and on the back end, we create a world where Parkinson's disease is increasingly rare.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, thank you for explaining that so well. I just have a couple more questions for you. I'm wondering how for both of you, how your understanding of Parkinson's has evolved over the course of your careers.
Yeah, so for me, I would just say a couple things. One, if you ask folks, 25 years ago, is Parkinson, environmental, or these toxins, or folks were showing up in our clinic and they were telling us about exposures, they got blown off. And I'm very sorry, to have to kind of think to myself back that we weren't paying attention. And it's like getting hit in the back of the head. We just were not paying attention to this issue. And now when we see folks present, we pay attention to clusters to disease. And as Ray said, is there a potential for what you might have been exposed to that may have played a role in your Parkinson, and trying to remove these things from the environment. So I think being more proactive is important, and thinking about the underlying cause. You can't treat a disease if you don't know about its cause. And so in the clinic, we're now asking those questions and paying more attention to the history than before. We're paying a lot more attention now to being proactive about things we can do in brain health, being more aggressive in treating diabetes if you have it, preventing melanoma, making sure you're on a multivitamin if you're on dopamine, treating your bones, being proactive about falling. We didn't have proactive falling plans for folks before. If you're on certain medications like dopamine agonists, having plans to make sure that you're monitored, because you may have side effects like impulse control disorders and start buying things uncontrollably. And so we've got to put in place plans for folks. And now we pay attention. We talk a lot about genetics with genetics counselors and access to clinical trials, and making sure that we're touching on sleep. If you don't sleep well, your Parkinson isn't as good the next day, and of course your symptoms get worse. And so sleep is important not only for the disease itself, but also for your symptoms. And so we pay a lot more attention to having plans for exercise, for sleep, talking about diet and where the diet is, and then thinking prevention, proactive, practical, preventative. We're moving these things into the clinic, and we're no longer blowing people off because they think they may have had and environmental exposure. We're really taking those things quite seriously.
Michael and I were in med school. We were taught that Parkinson's disease was some consequence of aging, bad luck, and vague discussions of gene environment interactions. We now know what the principal causes of Parkinson's disease are. Parkinson's disease is not a natural consequence of aging. Parkinson's is an unnatural consequence of aging. If you put a mouse in the laboratory and you let it age, it does not spontaneously develop Parkinson's disease. The only way it develops Parkinson's disease is if its genes are manipulated or it's exposed to toxic chemicals. These toxic chemicals are all around us. If we get rid of these toxic chemicals, we prevent Parkinson's disease. We make it so that our generation is the last generation to bear the burden of Parkinson's disease, so that we don't even have speech therapists, physical therapists, occupational therapists for Parkinson's disease, just like we don't have it for polio. We can create a world largely devoid of Parkinson's disease. We can create it so that there's no need for LSVT for Parkinson's disease, that there's no need for centers of excellence for Parkinson's disease, that there's no need to address the stigma of Parkinson's disease because we simply just don't have Parkinson's disease. But we need to change the course, and Michael and I wrote a plan to do that, a plan for individuals, a plan for communities, and a plan for societies to prevent and end Parkinson's disease.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, I would be glad to be out of a job and steer my efforts in a new direction if it meant that there was no more Parkinson's. So I think that was a great way to express that sentiment. Thank you. And just a final question, what gives you hope about the future for people affected by Parkinson's?
Yeah, so for me, first of all, I think hope is a really important thing. And if you read the book, I think you'll see that there's a lot of hope. The last chapter is about navigating new therapies, near term, midterm, and long term. And I'm really excited about what I'm seeing. I'm also excited about busting the myth that Parkinson's isn't treatable. Okay, it's very different. Many people think when you get a diagnosis of Parkinson, you have Alzheimer's disease. We've actually asked people about this, and folks don't know, so they just assume it must be Alzheimer's. And I mean nothing to the Alzheimer's community negative. You all are awesome, okay? But it's two different diseases with two different courses, and we have so many treatments for Parkinson. And so I'm really excited about that. I'm excited about both the short term and repurposing drugs, and the longer term and the medium term, and things like CRISPR gene therapies and nanomedicine and new neuromodulation techniques, all the new pumps that are coming along the way. But guess what? I'm also super excited about these teams, okay? The team approach to Parkinson care is really changing how these 12 million folks, or almost 12 million folks, are living with Parkinson, and how we're shifting our care models to care better for people. And remember that, it's one thing to live longer, okay, lifespan. It's a whole other thing to have health span. And so I want to create as much personally for the people that I come in contact with, help you to get as much health span, as much good living as you can get. And Parkinson is one of those diseases where we have so much opportunity. What do you think? What do you think, Ray?
So I think there are three reasons to be optimistic. So Michael details the new frontier of treatments in chapters 8 and 9 of the book, and gives you lots of hope for what can happen in the near, mid, and long term. Second, we give you 25 ways to potentially slow the rate of progression of the disease. So if you already have the disease, we give you 25 actions that can potentially slow the rate of the disease. Many of these are free, almost all of them are low cost, and almost all of them are accessible to just about anyone with the disease. And then finally, we give you a plan so that your children, your spouse, your nephews, your nieces, your brothers, your sisters, your grandchildren, and generations to come do not need to bear this burden of this disease, so that we create a world without it. We've inherited a world largely free of polio. Many of you contribute to a world that where drinking and driving is socially unacceptable. We're inherited a world where Parkinson's disease is decreasing, where HIV is decreasing and may disappear as a major clinical entity. We have an obligation to receive these gifts, and we have an obligation to reciprocate. And Michael and I are hopeful people, and we think that we are now poised perhaps for the best time in our memories to create a world without Parkinson's disease. And if you have a chance to end a disease, you must take it, and you must take it now. You must transform your anger into action so that future generations are spared the terrible effects of this debilitating disease.
Well, thank you. Thank you both. Thank you for leading the way, for your words of wisdom, for your time here today. I'll get into some final credits. Before we do go, I want to remind our listeners that we are giving away some books, some of the copies of the Parkinson's plan that we've been talking about. So to enter, all you need to do is tell someone about the podcast and complete our quick listener survey. And by doing so, you'll not only have a chance to win the book, but you'll also help spread knowledge, hope, and action to many families and communities. So I'll put that survey link in the show notes. And just again, a big thank you to you, Dr. Ray Dorsey and Dr. Michael Okun. We really appreciate you spending the time with us today and outlining some of these important findings in your book, what we can do as individuals, communities, and larger scale as well. And I'm going to link their website. So they have a website for their book, pdplan.org. So that will be in the show notes. All right, they're all set. Or the QR code right there. Thank you. And then we encourage you to purchase the Parkinson's plan. And they mentioned that the proceeds of the book go to charities. And this is available wherever books are sold. So I'll put the Amazon link in the show notes, but you can get these online at your local bookstore, wherever you'd like to purchase your books. And the theme song you're hearing at the beginning and end of the episode is called Think Loud for Parkinson's by Kindred Spirit and Leo Sayer. This is a song and video inspired by LSVT Loud speech treatment. It was developed to raise awareness for Parkinson's worldwide. It's available for download and streaming on all major music platforms. And proceeds benefit the UK charity Cure Parkinson's. And I'll also link that video in the show notes. I want to thank our production team, CS Design Studios. They do all the behind the scenes work to make the podcast possible. And to learn more about LSVT Loud speech therapy or LSVT Big physical or occupational therapy, or to locate therapists in your area, I'll encourage you to visit our website at lsvtglobal.com and click below to subscribe wherever you get your podcast so you never miss an episode. And we look forward to thinking big and loud with you again next time. So thanks for being with us today.